Hey guys, welcome back! Keeping up with my promise, let's continue to dive into my favorite DOS games year by year. So here's my 10 most played games from 1990 that indeed grabbed my attention and made me last tons of hours devouring every moment that I spent playing them at school and also over at friends' houses. Let's take a look.
Puzznic.
I was hooked to arcade gaming back in the 80s and 90s, so Taito was a huge name for me and would make me spend lots of coins trying out all their novelties. One Taito arcade legend is a tiny puzzle game entitled Puzznic that was even considered the 34th best game of all time for the Commodore Amiga. It's no more nor less than a tile-matching turn-based or hot-seat two-player puzzle arcade game released in 1989 for arcades and a year later for a bunch of home systems, PCs included. And let me tell you, this game is highly addictive, so be careful. Ocean Software was the company behind the conversion to practically all home systems of that era, except for this DOS port. Besides the arcade original, I would play this game to death on my ZX Spectrum 128K plus 2A and later on my Amiga 500. Also, and between classes, I would also play it with my mates at school, at the computer class, and see who was the smarmiest and fastest around to try and solve these intricate puzzles. As said, this DOS port wasn't by Software Creations and Ocean Software. It was brought to us by Banana Development. Yeah, have you ever heard of them? Me neither. And Puzznic was one of their latest efforts in this area, to my knowledge. These guys were specialized in IBM PCs and Apple II to ENGS conversions of coin-operated games from some of the biggest arcade names in the US. They would mess around with porting games like Contra and Operation Wolf to MS-DOS based computers. What I can't explain is that conversions from Banana Development were supposed to only be available in the United States. I guess that someone brought one of their games over to Europe and it simply spread it like bunnies. Or downloaded a copy through a bulletin board system. BBS's anyone? A really fun and addictive little game from those amazing folks at Taito, and a pretty faithful conversion.
Prince of Persia.
It's tough. Very tough. An incredibly demanding game. Pixel-perfect jumping was key to master this game. But it was so groundbreaking when it came out that left everyone who played it speechless, me included. It was created by the visionary Jordan Mechner during the span of almost 4 years, and the first version to come out was for the Apple II. The game was regarded as a forerunner of the cinematic platformer genre, so rather than following the more common jump and run mechanics, it focuses on careful advancement through fairly complex levels, emphasizing the protagonist's vulnerability and survival aspect. A technique called rotoscoping was used to give more realism to the animation of the character's movements, and as you know already, Jordan's brother was the, let's say, actor to perform these animations in real life, a technique also used in Jordan's first game, Karateka. What you probably didn't know was that their father composed the original music for Prince of Persia. In this one, we must avoid deadly traps, solve some simple jumping and environmental puzzles, and engage in sword fights with the guards. We have an infinite number of lives, but have to restart at the beginning of a level each time we die, and must complete the game within an hour. It sounds simple, but it isn't. Even so, a truly groundbreaking game, unlike everything else back in the day, that originated a plethora of ports and spawned a series that is still strong today.
Sid Meier's Railroad Tycoon.
Sid Meier is a legend in gaming, with some of the best well-known games under his belt. He's been around since 1981, developing and producing games, and his most successful series is, with no doubt, Civilization. The objective in Railroad Tycoon is to build and manage a railroad company by laying tracks, building stations, and buying and scheduling trains. The player acts as a railway business person and may start companies in any of 4 geographic locations: the Western United States, Northeast United States, Great Britain or Continental Europe, and the starting date varies depending on the map chosen. The company starts with $1 million in capital, half equity, half a loan. The company may raise additional capital through the sale of bonds. We manage the entire business and can also handle individual train movement and build additional industries. The game models supply and demand of goods and passengers, as well as a miniature stock market on which we can buy and sell stock of our own or competing companies. The game also has other railroad companies attempting to put us out of business with stock dealings and rate wars. A truly engaging and rewarding experience that brought that extra level of realism without losing all the fun of ludic entertainment.
Rick Dangerous 2.
The first Rick Dangerous was a huge deal for me on my ZX Spectrum and on my Amiga, so a sequel was highly anticipated. In this one, we must stop the fat guy and his evil plans to help an alien race take control of the entire world. Our journey takes place in Hyde Park, the ice caverns, a forest and the atomic mines, and we must solve positional puzzles and memorize the locations of laser bolts and booby traps, just like in the first game with those nasty spikes that would come out of nowhere. Besides that, we must obviously avoid enemies like robots, penguins and nomads. Also, a 5th level will be unlocked after the completion of the 4 standard levels. Rick can climb ladders and crawl through tight spaces. He's equipped with a laser gun and 6 bombs, but can also punch with some effect. The controls are very easy to understand. Pressing fire and up shoots the gun. Pressing fire and down places the bomb. Pressing fire and bottom left or bottom right makes Rick slide a bomb along the floor in the specific direction. The end of Rick Dangerous 2 does not complete the story. The game finishes with a cliffhanger, with Rick escaping via a teleporter device, with the caption, "What will Rick do next?" Though this might have hinted another sequel to the story, Rick Dangerous 3 was never made. Although a Rick Dangerous 2.5 was given away by the One Amiga on a cover disc, this was only a few additional levels and more of a demo than an actual sequel. Many of the concepts featured in these levels were later used in a Super Nintendo game entitled Danger Dan, which was also unfinished. It would have been amazing to see a continuation to this saga, wouldn't it?
King's Quest V. Absence makes your heart go yonder.
King's Quest V was first in many topics. Was the first adventure game to be released on CD-ROM in a multimedia PC format. Was the first to have digitized voiceovers. Was the first to use digitized hand-painted backgrounds. Was the first classic Sierra adventure to switch to icon control from the text parser system, and was the first title to cost over $1 million to produce. Despite not being my favorite in the whole series, my personal favorite is its sequel, King's Quest VI. This 5th game had such an immersive story that snatched me immediately. And being the first Sierra game to truly embrace the point-and-click interface, slightly different from the one we so much love in LucasArts adventures, was another argument to fully explore it and get the most from. So in this one, moving the mouse to the top of the screen reveals a hidden menu with each of the different actions and as well the different game options and the inventory bag. Everything you should expect from an adventure game is present, even a king, yeah, that's right. The series is called King's Quest, but you can only play with a king in this one and in the second installment, King's Quest II Romancing the Throne. And the version of this fifth entry that everyone should experience must be this one you're seeing now. Released 2 years later in 1992, the enhanced CD-ROM VGA version with full voiceovers. It still manages to grab me after all these years. Amazing.
Come on, Cedric, get in the boat. Aye, aye, Captain.
Wing Commander.
Wing Commander is a space combat simulator combined with shipboard dialogues that was developed by Origin Systems and published first back in September of 1990 for IBM PCs. Other versions would come 2 years later for the Amiga, the Super Nintendo and the FM Towns. The Sega CD would also receive its own conversion that would only arrive during 1994, a bit late from where I'm standing. The game was considered a major step forward for space dogfight games, featuring graphics, audio and a story campaign that invited the inevitable comparison to the Star Wars films. We play as a second lieutenant, just out of the academy, with some good work under our belt. We're posted to Tiger's Claw, the flagship of the Confederation fleet, and on board the ship, we can save or load the game, visit the bar to get the latest gossip, or go straight to mission briefing and the 3D space combat part. The 3D space combat has you sitting in the cockpit, where we control the craft like roll, turn, up or down, afterburner, as well as fire guns and launch missiles. There are 4 different crafts on the comfort side, each with different flight characteristics and armament. We'll have a wingman on each mission, and we should keep him alive, as he will help us if we issue the right orders. We can also taunt the enemy. We'll be fighting several different types of adversary fighters and capital ships, and even combat a few Kilrathi aces. When the mission is complete, land back on board the ship and get ready for the next one. It was incredibly well received and paved the road for LucasArts to bring, a few years later, their own saga of Star Wars related space combat simulators from the X-Wing and TIE Fighter series, but with a different approach in what graphics were concerned. But I'll leave that for a future video. Even so, and while you're at it, check my retrospective on the Lucasfilm and LucasArts history of Star Wars games.
Ivan Iron Man Stewart Super Off-Road.
I'm sure that you all played this one back in the day, through the many home conversions by GrafsGold and Software Creations available during 1990 and 1991 for practically all computers and consoles. I first recall playing it at the computer lab at school on a 386 desktop PC, and sadly never came across that iconic arcade cabinet with those 3 steering wheels. So, and besides this MS-DOS version, I was all over the ZX Spectrum and the Amiga ports of Super Off-Road. Also played the Mega Drive version over at a friend's house, and only many years later tried out the Super Nintendo version through emulation. To this day, I'm yet to try all other versions, cause as said, it was all over the place, for the Master System, for the NES, for the Game Boy, for the Atari ST, for the Commodore 64, for the Amstrad CPC, for the Game Gear, for the Atari Lynx, you name it. And please tell me, which ones have you played and are most fond about? And if you want to know more about the whole series, yes, it was the first game on a pretty cool series, check my retrospective and history video on the subject, link above and in the description below. It was converted from the arcade original from 1989 by Leland Corporation, an extremely fun and addictive off-road game to play up to 3 players simultaneously, plus 1 more controlled by the computer. There are several off-road tracks with jumps, bumps, holes, water splashing, you name it! And those figure 8 tracks are a joy to blast through, and they just look like Destruction Derby death matches, trying to avoid the other opponent. Ivan Iron Man Stewart Super Off-Road is so much fun, and probably where my love for off-road racing started. And this one was included back in 2012 in the Midway Arcade Origins compilation for the PS3 and Xbox 360.
Golden Axe.
I guess that everyone on Earth played Golden Axe. It's one of the most fondly remembered video games ever, and also one of my first experiences on a DOS machine equipped with VGA graphics back in 1990 at school. With this amazing artwork and backstory that somewhat reminds me of the fantasy medieval scenario of Conan the Barbarian, from where the game was in fact inspired, we must guide our heroes across the besieged land of Uria, slaughter the main villain Death Adder, free the king and his daughter, and gain possession of the Golden Axe. Sounds simple, but Death Adder's foes are tough and have some of their own moves up their sleeves. Except these skeletons. And this Uria spot must be a very hot place, cause both Tyrese Flare the Amazon chick and Axe Battler the Barbarian spend the entire game walking around in their underwear. Okay, jokes aside, I can't simply recall another video game available till that time in where we could cast magic spells, ride dragons and fight skeletons, all this on the backs of a giant turtle and of an eagle. Brilliant stuff! The PC version would also allow us to use dragons on the back of the main characters, play with the final boss, Death Adder, and so on, simply by changing file names in the game's folder. So, use your imagination. Another fun fact is that most of the death screams of the bad guys were digitized from the film First Blood, the first Rambo movie. And also from Conan the Barbarian. Yeah.
"4D Sports Driving."
4D Sports Driving was known in the US as Stunts, and let me say that it makes more sense having the name used in Europe, because it's part of the 4D Sports series along with 4D Sports Tennis and 4D Sports Boxing that I also played, but not as much. The game places emphasis on racing on stunt tracks and features a track editor in where I would spend infinite hours creating the most absurd and unique tracks to share with my friends and school colleagues. Yes, cause friends and colleagues are a totally different thing.
Oh yeah.
The game was evidently influenced by Hard Driving and has many similar elements to the game Stunt Driver, which was released the same year. We race a lap around the circuit with the aim of completing it as quickly as possible without crashing. These laps often feature special track areas such as loops, jumps, slalom roads and corkscrews. Like many others from that era and beyond, the play area is restricted and surrounded by a fence to prevent us from leaving. We can either race against the clock or choose between 6 different opponents, and sadly, there is no support for real-time multiplayer. The game features 11 different drivable cars, with either automatic or manual transmission, and replays of races can be saved and reviewed later. There are 4 camera views available during replay and actual driving, and the dashboard is an optional overlay on all views. It is also possible to continue the race from any point in the replay, but the time for that race will not be recorded. The game was originally developed for MS-DOS based PCs and 2 years later also released for the Amiga, FM Towns and NEC PC 9801. It arrived in Europe in December of 1990, so Christmas vacations were a truly memorable time where I would spend tons of hours over at friends' houses playing and creating all sorts of crazy tracks and performing the most absurd stunts. As said, the Amiga version would only arrive by 1992 and only then I would play it on my 500. By the end of 1993 I was finally able to enjoy the game on my own PC and further develop and enhance my own self-made tracks, the ones I created 3 years prior on other PCs and stored on disk.
The Secret of Monkey Island.
The very first time I tried this game was around September of 1990 on my brand new Amiga 500 and with pirated floppies that were duplicated in a perfectly normal and legit electronics and computer store, utilizing that useful tool known as Xcopy. 3 months later, just before Christmas, I tried the DOS version on a friend's IBM PS2 model, and I was blown away. The fact that we could install the game on the computer's hard drive and avoid that dreadful disk swapping that I was used to was, for my younger self, mind-blowing. It's a bit silly to describe this game, cause I'm pretty sure that even if you haven't played The Secret of Monkey Island, you've already heard all about it. We play as Guybrush Threepwood, that was named after a deluxe paintbrush file placeholder. So Guybrush wants to become a pirate, and to fulfill that dream, he embarks in this huge adventure that starts in the Malay Island. Collecting unusual objects will turn Guybrush into a skilled pirate, and just then he can crew a ship and head sail to the mysterious Monkey Island. Sword fighting is a common thing among pirates, but in this game, we win these battles by insulting the opponent. I don't know how much grog Gilbert, Grossman and Schaefer drank while developing The Secret of Monkey Island, but I can imagine that it was quite a lot. This game is one of the most hilarious titles ever made, and the only way we can die in it is by staying underwater for more than 10 minutes. The designers just wanted to offer a completely different experience than the ones from Sierra's adventure games of the time, where if we did anything wrong, we just ended up dead. The relaxed nature of point-and-click adventure games was a breath of fresh air for players that were tired of violent and fast-paced action games. Not having to worry about extra lives or credits was something quite uncommon, and facing challenging puzzles was always seen as kind of didactical, even if most of them were solved with a crazy and stupid combination of items. So guys, here you have it, the 10 games released back in 1990 for PCs that I spent the most time with. Tell me down in the comments section below if you've played any of them, and feel free to share your personal favorites from that particular year. I would love to know, cause I'm sure that I'll discover a ton more by reading your feedback. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed this episode, you know the drill. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you all in my next video. Cheers!